data at that time wasn't as big of a thing as it is now. And starting my career in investments, I actually kind of fell out of love with analytics and data. In capital markets, it's extremely difficult. Things change over time in capital markets, and data is not always as, like, I guess, using data looking back isn't always as informative as it is going forward. I found the private equity firms as clients and their portfolio companies were much more concerned with what have you done. And that, to me, like, the work came alive when that was the question. What have you tried this week? What progress have you made? What are the results of that, and what are we doing next week? And that, to me, it was just so much more exciting and interesting to work with.
Behind every value creation plan, there's a data problem nobody wants to talk about. Fragmented systems, metrics nobody trusts, and decisions made on gut feel dressed up as analysis. Welcome to the PE Data Guy. Each week, host Graham Crawford talks to the operating partners, advisors, and practitioners who are doing the work inside portfolio companies. If you care about what actually drives returns in the mid-market, then you're in the right place. The PE Data Guy starts now. Ryan Krook has seen mid-market data problems from almost every angle that matters. He started his career managing equity derivatives portfolios at Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, one of the largest institutional investors in the world, with the private equity allocation north of $30 billion. From there, he moved to McKinsey, then ran business operations at Shopify during its hypergrowth phase, and led data science teams before the 2023 layoffs hit. Today, he runs Pareto Apps, where he builds bespoke data and AI solutions for PE-backed portfolio companies and early-stage startups. What makes Ryan's perspective really rare is that he has sat on the LP side of the table, consulted for PE firms from the outside, and now works hands-on inside the portfolio companies, fixing the data problems that operating partners care about the most. So really has seen it from all angles. Welcome to the show, Ryan. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Graham. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Great. It's a long and wonderful, and someone else who spent their career in data, I'd love to hear about it. Like, your love from data, like, could you pinpoint where it came from, or how you fell into the world of data, or what drew you to it?
That's a great question. It's actually a bit of a meandering path, because I went to school for quantitative finance, and really enjoyed that space of mathematics. Data at that time wasn't as big of a thing as it is now. And starting my career in investments, I actually kind of fell out of love with analytics and data. In capital markets, it's extremely difficult. You're using data for let's say, like, for analysis and for your portfolio construction, but things change over time in capital markets, and data is not always as, like, I guess, using data looking back isn't always as informative as it is going forward. When I moved my career more into the tech space, I worked at Uber and at Shopify, and really started to see how you could use data to create a picture of the business and dig deep into different aspects. And at Uber, it was especially neat. We looked at all of our metrics and everything on a weekly basis, and you can see rider behavior from one week to the next is pretty consistent. And you can also pick apart different changes. Like, you could correlate ride requests to weather patterns and see specific spikes during, a sudden thunderstorm that shows up for a couple of hours during the day. You can actually see that. And again, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but when you can only do that when you have your data in a place that allows you to dig into those key parts.
And what an incredible data set to work with, Uber Rides as well. Like, I'd love to get my hands on that. It's one of the many great names you've been associated with in your career. But can you give, for people who are used to working with smaller data sets, can you give people a general idea of the size of the Uber Rides data set that you were working with?
I will say that Uber had clearly invested a lot of money in building a really strong and well-structured data set. And that enabled operations teams, because Uber was very decentralized in terms of its operations. Most big cities have their own operations team, and everything was set up so that you, as an operations manager, could manage the team desperately. And I'd say, like, in the city of Toronto, where I worked, at that time we were seeing over 1 million rides per week, just in that city alone. And you can imagine, along with along with that trip comes all the data about the riders, the drivers, where the request came from, their different geolocations. Like I think the data set is enormous and probably well beyond what I even had access to as an operations manager.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a million rows a week plus however many columns equals a lot of data points, right? It's a fun one. My only exposure to Uber data is going in to check my passenger rating, which I don't know. Like I was hoping it would be 5, and it wasn't. I guess that's more common than people like to think, right? I think a rating of 5 is pretty rare for a passenger.
Probably.
Just being kind to me now, Ryan.
Yeah. I mean, you can't ever bring that average up, right? It's a perfect score, and I don't know if they drop off some and kind of do a rolling average. At the time that I was there, you couldn't see your rider score. Only driver scores were published, and they changed that, I think, probably towards the end of my tenure there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to look up, and even now when you look it up, it's interesting the caveats that Uber puts around it of nobody's going to have a perfect score, and it tries to make people feel good, as good as possible. And it says like things like maybe you closed the door a little too hard on the way out of the cab, maybe you made somebody wait 2 minutes, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, and it comes up with all these reasons to kind of soften the blow, because it's hard for a company like that who has competitors to give feedback to its users. Data points aren't always easy to look at, right?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I've seen driver accounts where you could see an entire shift of them driving where they gave everybody 1 star, and
Wow.
they were not having a good day. They were just probably something completely unrelated to how you closed the door could bring down that rating. So take it with a grain of salt.
It's a tough day. I took a 40-minute ride, I think, in Florida in January last month. And the driver was driving pretty fast. He was safe. Like I'm familiar with how safe drivers are, but he was a chunk over the speed limit, let's say. And when I arrived, I actually got a proactive notification from Uber saying, your safety is our priority. Like they were almost like good because they'd been tracking, like you covered this distance in this amount of time. Therefore, so yeah, credit to a company that was built on data, that uses data super well. Moving from one super big name to another. You spent a while working at McKinsey, one of the biggest names in the world when it comes to consultancy. And during that stint, you spent a bunch of time working with PE firms. What did you learn about private equity from that side, working for McKinsey in the ecosystem?
Yeah. So when I worked typically I would work with the private equity owned companies, like their portfolio companies. And I enjoyed that so much more than doing kind of the strategy or analysis overview that was more focused on telling people what they should do. I found the private equity firms as clients and their portfolio companies were much more concerned with what have you done. And that, to me, like, the work came alive when that was the question. We do weekly steer co meetings with the CEO present, and the questions were never around how good does the deck look, how great are the ideas. It was, what have you tried this week? What progress have you made? What are the results of that? And what are we doing next week? And that, to me, was, it was just so much more exciting and interesting to work with. And you get into like the nuanced things about that can stall a business. So the one example that was the first client that I worked with was a small financial services company where regulator had changed things on them, and basically the revenue dropped January 1st by 90%.
Wow,
and they
that's a
had
big
to,
jump.
yeah, that's a big jump.
An existential jump, one might say.
Exactly. And so we had to figure out at the same time, what do we do to sort of stop the bleeding, to make things, to kind of find new sources of revenue, to limit costs now, but also how do we make this a viable business for the next 5 or 10 years? And there was no time we were coordinating with different advisory committees. It was for the most part a very hands-on project, and that really spoke to me. And I didn't want to go back after working on one of those projects. And that's what I continued to kind of pursue while I was at McKinsey, and now is kind of working with those companies that are more driven to more driven to make changes and to improve quickly.
I have to say, it's one of the things I love about the private equity ecosystem. For all the bad rap that it gets, it's almost straight down to business, right? And we're not doing transformation theater. We're not managing perceptions. We are trying to improve and grow a business. And that is the leading indicator. And that is the thing the metric that we all rally around in the ecosystem. So I actually find it, to some, it may have a harsher edge, but I actually find that element of it quite refreshing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you have a lot of alignment around the same focus, particularly with, you generally have an idea of an exit timeline, somewhere between 5 to 10 years. That's not a huge amount of time if you want to make really big changes within a business, and so you need to act fast. You don't want to waste time.
Of the many things that McKinsey is famous for, being cheap is not one of them. What sort of companies were you working with? In my mind, I'm imagining that these are large companies that can afford the rates that McKinsey would have been charging.
Well, I think actually they weren't, and usually it was the private equity firm that was engaging with McKinsey to come in and help. And I think that's why it ended up being that private equity owned companies were this interesting project, because they were smaller than the typical McKinsey client. And again, I mentioned earlier, like the CEO would be someone that I could call or text or get a hold of, versus, if you go to a large international bank, there's probably 10 or 20 McKinsey teams working on various things. The CEO has no idea.
I know what those are like.
And they might show up at the end of your 3-month project to receive your deck or something like that. And I think because of the structure and the incentives of the private equity ownership, we got involved in companies that would be typically smaller and wouldn't be hiring a firm like McKinsey.
Right. So in that case, the PE firm was that company's leverage, right? And being PE backed was one of the advantages of that, was the PE firm will send McKinsey in to help out.
Exactly. And I mean, who actually paid for that? I don't know. We never got into that, but it was definitely, that seemed to be the way that we got into working with those kind of more mid-cap companies.
Yeah, it's a wonderful cross-pollination story. I've been on both sides of it. I've worked at large corporations. I've also worked in larger consultancy with Accenture and with IBM. So IBM was the original "nobody gets fired for hiring," the end of that sentence. And I think McKinsey's very much in that mold as well. So it's really interesting to hear about that, because I'd always figured McKinsey to be in the nobody gets fired for hiring McKinsey. And if I'm a big company, I hire McKinsey and it doesn't work out, I can just rattle my saber, get a discount, and they'll send a different team in. And internally, because a lot of what happens inside these big corporations, and I know because I spent a lot of time in there, is risk is being managed, right? And if something goes awry, you want to be able to distance yourself from it. And if you bring McKinsey and it doesn't work out, then you can shrug and say, well, I brought the best consultants. I contracted the best consultancy firm in the world, so this isn't my fault. Which, like it or not, is often the priority in those cases.
Yeah, and I think what I found, and I don't know if this resonates with your experience, but in smaller companies, they tend to attract a different type of talent. And what I found was you worked with people who a lot of time had been with the company for quite some time. They really knew the business. But there were just ways that bringing in someone like me from McKinsey could add a lot of value, could give a new perspective. You kind of get rid of the ways saying things like, "Oh, this is how we've always done it,"
yes,
and add that new perspective. Whereas I think in larger corporations, you may see people who are a bit more transient, who are more interested in, they're there to climb the ladder. They want the best outcome for themselves. And I think there was amongst the leaders in these companies, people who just they really liked the company. They wanted to see it succeed, and they were keen to work with someone who could help them do that.
Yeah.
Versus just saying like, I'm going to hand over the risk and the responsibility over to someone like McKinsey, and I can kind of back off.
Yeah, and people will back off as long as they can reap the rewards. I talk about this often. the client of the big Fortune 500 that hires McKinsey in will stay close enough so that they can claim credit when it goes well, but stay far enough away such that they can disavow if it doesn't work out. And on the more positive side, your experience matches mine exactly. In the last couple of years working in mid-market, often there's longer tenure, and often you've got big groups of employees that really deeply care about the company's success. Like they've invested the majority of their career in this company. And the magical thing then is, how can we redirect this effort or reshape this effort and this love and this care into ways that can not only help grow this business, but help these people realize the full full set of outcomes that their efforts deserve. Let's shift on to talking about data and data gaps. So you mentioned when we spoke previously that PE firms acquire mid-market companies that have invested heavily in their core operations, and it might be in manufacturing, as an example, but have put nothing into their data and IT, and it's almost technology is catching up. What does that actually look like from your perspective when you get inside one of those companies that's never really kind of opened the Pandora's box of how might we use data and technology to grow and catalyze this business?
Yeah, that obviously that varies a lot from company to company. I think what I meant in my comments before is it's easy or easier to say we're going to invest in a technology that helps us build a better product, and kind of, but operating the business, I think, always is the forgotten child of operating a business. It comes to a lot as being like a nice to have. I think in previous years, and I don't know how far you'd have to go back, but I mean, certainly more than 6 or 7 years ago, setting up a proper data infrastructure or trying to leverage the technology that you and I are talking about now, it required teams. And if you're a mid-market company
and money,
I mean, for example, I worked at a company, a Canadian company startup called Borrowell, where I led their data science team, and it was a company. We were probably in the range of 50 to 70 employees. They raised their Series B while I was there. Our data team was 7 people, including me. Like that's 10% of the company.
Yeah.
And most companies are not, and that's a tech company that's built on data. We had machine learning at the time, like machine learning products in production, and all of that's a part of it. But there used to be a big blocker where you have to kind of decide to invest in having engineering teams to stand up the kind of applications or services to service those, and the same with data. And when I started Pareto Apps a couple of years ago, it was really on the idea that you can do a lot more very simply with the technology that's coming out, and that's the push that I'm making now, is to say, like, this that seemed before inaccessible not that long ago is now really easy, and we can do it kind of as a one-man show, so to speak, for now, versus hiring a full-time team. But to get back to your question about what does it look like? I mean, the obvious things come out where you can't get simple numbers like reporting monthly. It takes a week to close the books at the end of the month, and that obviously leads to, well, not only do you not see your business performance, but it hinders your ability to make decisions about things going forward. And then I think what's becoming more and more pressing is, if you want to use more advanced technologies like AI, and you don't have data, your data in place, then good luck. Like, yeah, you can implement a chatbot, but if it's not properly accessing the data about your business and can't find what you need it to know, you're probably missing, I mean, I don't know, 50, 80% of the potential upside. And I think that this is just a new area now that's become accessible for so many more companies, because the barriers to entry have just significantly decreased in the last couple of years, and in some cases the last couple of months, actually.
Oh yeah, things are changing fast, for sure. And beyond the technology, which again has become easier to use and to implement, cost is another thing. And I have this with a number of my clients. When I start talking about enterprise warehouse tools like Snowflake, for example, the perception people have is like, oh, those are for big companies. Those are really expensive warehouses. They're hard to manage. They're expensive to license and maintain. But in many cases in market companies, you're not dealing with astronomical amounts of data the same as, I was at Capital One or you were at Uber. You're dealing with the amount of data that you can, if you're disciplined and efficient about how you store it, probably land in a Snowflake warehouse and benefit from all of that technology for under 10,000 US a year. And in people's minds, it's a six-figure investment and whatever else. So that's one of the light bulb moments that I have with a few of my clients, even on a cost perspective.
And they make and tools like Snowflake make that so much easier. I know actually at Borrowell we transitioned from using we were an Azure house and we transitioned to our data warehouse being on Snowflake. And this was pretty early days for Snowflake, but just instantly saw, I think it was more than a 50% drop in cost because everything was like, you separated the storage from the compute and you only paid for what you needed. Whereas, anyway, I'll digress from that point. But basically, it almost happens for you just by moving onto one of these platforms. Like you don't have to go hunting around for that cost savings.
Yeah, it's the discipline and rigor on the way in. And I say this: Snowflake is obviously great technology. You talked about the separation of storage and compute, the secret sauce that they've always had. And yet, if you take poorly governed but bad quality data and put it on a Snowflake warehouse, it just becomes a more expensive version of the poorly governed data. Yep. And actually one of the benefits of moving on to Snowflake is if it's done correctly and led correctly, is it enforces the introduction and maintenance of basic data governance that then makes the data in itself much more valuable. Even for basic queries, but then, as you say, onwards to AI.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think data governance is probably you need a sexier term for data governance, because I think it does, even to me it sounds a little bit bureaucratic, but it can mean something as simple. I think about it in terms of you just having a lineage. Like if you're looking at some kind of report, some kind of metric that you want for your business, and if you can't, at least in theory, work back to know where did that data come from. And by the way, anytime you copy data into an Excel sheet, you break that lineage. Yeah. It's a real challenge. And as soon as your report goes wrong once, you lose that credibility. And so building in that whole system of having different states from raw, transforming it into something that you can use, but always the ability to look backwards, even if maybe the need to do so comes up once a year. It's key to having a robust system that can be trusted.
Yeah, no, absolutely correct. And the misaligned expectation that exists out there of, can AI just fix the data? You need to give the AI a set of rules that typically are tantamount to data governance in some form, to tell it how to derive and understand. And if, for example, you've got 3 core systems that are all showing a different number for revenue or active customers or whatever it might be, someone's going to have to tell the AI which one of those is right. And if you don't know, then AI is not going to fix your data for you. So I'm also a bit cynical about these pane of glass applications that people try and sell as SaaS products that basically collect all of the garbage from every corner of the company and put it in one big pile of garbage with a nice dashboard on top of it. I've got very little time for those apps.
Well, I can tell you, I was in a WhatsApp chat with everyone, actually the team I used to manage at Borrowell, and everyone has moved on to different companies. But someone a couple of weeks ago shared a story where they said, look, we had set up this kind of analytics or reporting structure that was using AI, and nobody checked that it was accurate. And for months had reported to leadership just completely the wrong number, until somebody asked the question, and this is like, well, it's great. AI can write the query. So it just is pulling this up. And I don't know exactly where the breakdown was, but nobody went through to verify the metric. Apparently big decisions were made on this. And that's just I think that's the downfall of just believing that AI is going to do everything for you.
Yeah, exactly. So in a company that's not really, bring it back to bring the PE lens back, as delightful as much as we enjoy the data vibes. If a company's not invested a lot in data and technology, and it's 2026 now, like where would be a good place to start? Like what's the highest ROI thing you think a company could do if they're like, okay, now we're going to get serious about data and tech? What should we do?
Yeah, I think like so I'll say I named my company Pareto because after the 80-20 rule, and the idea was, do the small things that have the outsized gains. And so I'd say like there's a path that I would follow kind of for any client, but where you apply that depends on really on where the company's value is being generated from. And so this could be in sales, this could be in operations, this could be in product, but really, I kind of have like I have more steps to it than this. But you can kind of think about it as like you're at the base level, you're using data for reporting.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you're using data which tells you a backward looking story. How are you doing? Getting to the point where you can use data for making decisions. And then finally, kind of on top of that is building systems that actually use the data. And getting to that point, it should be the goal. I think that's where you find a lot of operational leverage. But I think you can't really do that until you got the data in place to be able to do reporting. If you can't say, almost instantly, like what was our revenue last month, to use a very simple metric, but it could be for a product, like what was our number of users, how many customers did we have, all of those things. They come from having the data in place. And so what I would say is generally bringing it back to the idea of Pareto is you start small. And it can seem really kind of almost pedantic to say like we're going to get our basic metrics and be able to look at those on a monthly or weekly basis consistently. Surprisingly, that can be a huge undertaking, but also a huge unlock when you do that, and maybe it takes a couple of weeks. But the light goes on for all the leaders who can now look at the metric, who can slice it and dice it in the way that they want. That sparks a bunch of ideas, and we generally kind of move out from there to take in more and more and build out more and more of a system. And that kind of feeds into starting to make decisions.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Pareto, and one of the things I love about it is you test ideas fast and get things in front of people quickly that may not be finished or polished or perfect. How does that work in the context of PE value creation? Typically, I always say data and tech are not business cases in their own right. So there has to be some business thing driving it. But say an operating partner says, we need better visibility into, let's just say, revenue. What does that cycle look like when you can get something in front of them really fast?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm describing is the reason that we do things iteratively is it's, I would say, impossible to build a large system into a business correctly from the kind of before you start trying. And so the iterative approach does two things really well. One, it allows us to get started really quickly and start realizing benefits almost immediately. So again, you start small. So if it's generating, if it's getting a view into revenue, we pour all of our effort into figuring out where does the data sit to come up with a reliable revenue metric. We build out those systems, those pipelines. And like I said, like now that could be as simple as spinning up a Postgres database somewhere that ingests and setting up the pipelines to ingest all that data from other systems. But you get the benefit of that maybe after 1 week or after 2 weeks as we look to expand out that system and say, well, what else is important? Or what's wrong with this metric that isn't quite doing what you wanted it to do, and how do we correct? So I think it complements that approach really well. It doesn't mean we won't do what end up being larger scale projects, but it does mean delivering quickly smaller pieces that are always sort of functional. Another way that I look at it is often like working inside of operating teams and building out systems so that we're never at some point have a big transition where we have to take people out of their jobs, give them new training. Here's a new system. It's a lot of the reason that bespoke works really well is because you can build things into the way they're currently conducting
Right.
business. And that may not sound as appealing as it is, because it's like, well, I want to rethink everything and I want to do it the best way. But if that takes people out of their roles, it takes people's time away from what you actually want them to do, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, operations, that has a real cost to it. And so a lot of some of the work that I do around data is, it'll even start with just automating things in and out of a spreadsheet, where you're like, this is where people will go anyway. We're just removing the copying and pasting, and that adds a better lineage to it. That saves them time, but it reduces that shift while getting a lot of the benefit. And then again, you get to learn from that. Are we capturing the right things? What would we do differently before you start building a more mature system?
Yeah, no, absolutely the case, and a great approach. So from all the angles you've worked in around with inside PE ownership, one of the things that we referenced earlier is PE firms or PE-backed companies often move faster. Beyond the focus on revenue, why do you think that is? What hurdles do they move out of the way that would typically otherwise stall initiatives?
That's a good question. I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of alignment between the management team at the company, the private equity firm. They have a fixed time. Like a lot of companies don't have a certain timeline in which we need to achieve this within, I said, 5 to 10 years, somewhere in there. And I experienced this certainly at McKinsey, where if you're, the private equity firm, either they have several seats on the board or they make up the entire board, but they're hands-on working with the management team within the company. And typically you don't have that same kind of drive and that same kind of focus. And I think there's that gives a really strong ability to say what we're not going to do as well, which can derail other projects. It's really neat to it's really easy to come up with a bunch of different things that we should be doing, but it's always really hard to strip those down, prioritize, and say, no, this is the thing. This is what's going to make the difference. All these others are good. They would add value, but we can't do everything at the same time. And if we try, we're either going to slow down or we're going to fail at them.
I've been talking with a guest in the past few weeks about the paradox that operating partners sometimes find themselves in, because historically, through financial gymnastics or leveraging capital or whatever they do it, it's been possible to purchase a company, just wait for it to grow, and then realize the returns and deliver those to your investors. I think more and more, and Bain's report this week actually talked a lot about how value creation is more important than it's ever been, and you need to be pushing for 12% increase in EBITDA every year rather than 5%. And yet, you've got the pull of, historically this used to work, even if it doesn't anymore. Historically this used to work. And also you've got, in a very competitive environment, where if there is a great company, there'll be a number of PE firms interested in acquiring. And often the CEO or the leadership team of that company will lean towards which one of these firms is going to be the most hands-off, right? And let me just run my business and do it the way I want to. When actually, in order to be successful, they probably need a firm who's going to lean in a little harder. And I think one of the outcomes you get from that is operating partners who are in there with accountability but no ownership, or under-empowered, and they can come up with, the same as you or I might, Ryan, come up with a list of here's a list of things that would add value to this company, but then they don't have the authority to get them done. Have you seen that play out either in PE-backed firms or just in general?
Where so you're saying where the management team has ideas, but they don't have the
yeah, or an operating partner from the firm has ideas that then don't get traction because there's resistance to change for whatever reason.
Probably not. I don't have as much experience with that as you might. I mean, I think generally, I tend to work with firms who are when they are engaged with the company, and they're bringing me on because they have ideas and things that they want to change.
Yeah, which is the right way to do it, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'll say as a side note, like I think that there's an opportunity for this, like for data and for bringing technology into the operations as an investment thesis, where that's what you find companies who ideally have data or have access to it, but aren't leveraging it, and that on its own, I think could make the multiples work. I know that I think of one example where I worked with a client. It was a pretty large company. I think they had been public, and the firm took them private. And I was working with them on it was an HR kind of style project where the data was understandably very, very sensitive. But I'm not looking for anything about any particular individual. It was a lot of aggregate data, but really struggled to find anyone who could give me the data. And it's things like, like aggregate payroll data that, like this company has to have.
Yes.
There's no way that the
IRS is going to come asking for that at some point.
That you didn't know about it. And I kept getting pushback. Like there was some excuse so this was in like 2024, I think. And like, oh, we changed systems in 2022 and we can't look back before that. And I'm like, and to this day, I don't know. I was never able to.
May have been true.
It could have been. But there's no good reason for that, even if the data sits idle in an inaccessible system. But I can't say whether that was poor data management or if that was kind of resistance from within, being like, wow, this is private data, or we have some things that we want to hide. We kind of delivered the work the best that we could, but that was a bit of a frustrating effort.
Yeah, there's often some resistance, and one of the things I read earlier this month, revenue can hide a multitude of sins, right? And I think I don't think this wave has hit the shore yet, but I'd love your perspective. I think I see it coming. There's a bunch of companies that in the last year have, courtesy of vibe coding, put together incredible scaling revenue numbers, and yet they might be one API change or one policy change or one integration break, or suddenly NAN or Zapier goes down or whatever, like from the whole thing collapsing. Don't get me wrong, some of these vibe coded apps have been put together very thoughtfully, integrated very well, stand on good architecture, and have good developers behind them. But many of them don't. Do you think there's a wave coming in the next couple of years of Icarus style vibe coded apps that fly too close to the sun and then burn off in ashes?
I think one thing I'll share that I was watching a webinar actually this week about vibe coding in enterprise, and it was for Bolt, which is one of the vibe coding services, and they were showing how you could have this internally built app, and with a few clicks of a button, you fork that app, and now you as any employee can build on top of this, can add to it, can make changes. And I thought, what, I've seen this story play out with Excel, where everybody in the company has a different version. And what comes with different versions of apps or Excel sheets is different numbers and different metrics.
Yeah.
I think they got questioned about it, and I don't think they had a really great answer. It was something like, well, we should probably hand this off to an engineering team to
maybe
be the final say. But it happens with all sorts of dashboarding tools where there needs to be some sort of middle ground between being bespoke and custom enough that serves an individual's needs, but a coordinated effort so that we're all looking at the same thing. And I think that's one place where I see, like, it's super easy to set up an app now especially for internal or bespoke purposes, especially if you have your data in order. But yeah, with no oversight or no governance, I mean, you don't know necessarily what's under the hood or what's happening. And Yeah, like I mean, it's just like the example that I was giving before, where AI was writing the queries. If AI is writing the code, and you don't know necessarily what you're looking at, or haven't thought about all the edge cases, I I think that I think that will naturally come, and some people will come up with better solutions or new solutions for how to handle that. But I think we're going to end up in a world where we've gone from a world where every company has their own app for everything to a world where everybody has their own app for everything.
Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but having been dissatisfied with various versions of personal CRMs, and I'm talking about just to help, remind me to stay in touch with my friends, remember when people's birthdays are, except something that Facebook used to do well before they obfuscated it amongst notifications and adverts. And I didn't want to pay $45-50 a month for one, and I was struggling with integration. I just built my own the other week. It lives on my local machine. Maybe it'll get deleted one day by accident, but for now, it does a job, and it is just for me, so I don't run into that integration issue. Or per the app you mentioned in question, which branch is main, right? That's when the tree starts growing four trunks off in different directions. Like, where are we building on, and who's going to integrate it afterwards? If a great feature appears over on this branch, and then another great feature appears 3 months later on this
Right.
one. I'll close you up by asking a question about AI and just your thoughts on AI in general. It comes up on every podcast I listen to, and certainly not least mine. As always with things that get covered in the media, the biggest coverage goes to the coverage at either end of the spectrum, right? So a lot of the AI coverage you see in normal media is either AI is going to take over the world and nobody's going to have a job in 6 months, at number 10 on the scale, and at number 1 on the scale, you get the people who are maybe a bit blinkered about its capabilities and say it's useless, it's way too dangerous. Humans will always have to be in the loop. It will make more jobs for us. Like, it's not really going to change anything at 1 on the scale. From what you've seen of the capabilities, like, where would you put it between 1 and 10?
I mean, it's definitely, I would put it on the higher end. And it depends on, I guess, do you mean in current state or where it's clearly headed? I mean, if we had recorded this even 1 month ago, I guess to say the amount that the improvement we've seen in the last month or the last 3 months, I don't think anyone has ever seen anything like
It's
this.
wild.
I recognize I'm in a bit of a microcosm where this is a part of my daily work. It's changed not only what I build but how I build. And I mean, for one quick anecdote or example, like last year alone, probably in the span of like from January to August, my workflow went from needing to write a sophisticated query taking a day to sit down, or maybe I copy paste some questions into ChatGPT to get the logic right, to setting up a project in Claude where it had some knowledge about the schema I was working in and could write queries for me, to connecting to a couple of MCP servers where it just runs the query. Like, I just ask it the questions, and it runs the query, builds the thing, and that has happened in such a short time. I think who knows where this is actually headed. I do think this is going to be a significant shift in work. My view is that technology has always, so at least information technology has done a good job about kind of removing the less enjoyable parts of our job,
Yeah.
our jobs and our days, and that changes work for everyone. But my hope is that it continues to do that, and you have AI capable of doing what it's great at doing, and the human mind and human ingenuity doing what it's great at. So I think it's going to be a huge shift. Are there really smart people who are actually predicting like this is the end of humanity and civilization? Yeah, and it's always interesting to hear how they're thinking about it. I guess I'm still hopeful that that's not the case, and we just find are able to spend more and more of our time focused on more interesting things, and in the grander scheme, progress humanity in a positive way in that with that.
Yeah, humanity has its flaws for sure, but in my book, it's something definitely worth preserving. um,
Yes, I'm definitely on the side of preserving humanity. Just
yeah,
so that's
there you go. That's an easy one for everyone to agree on. I think. Yeah, I live inside the same bubble as you. I think we are able to see around the corner a little more
so where would you
than.
place it on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, I have it at about 7 or 8, I think. As you say, the question's a little mingled between where it is now versus where it might end up. So I think I'm more rooted in where it might end up. But I think some of the things that I've seen capable in my own business with way smaller teams, 2 times, 3 times, 5 times smaller teams than I might have
Yeah.
needed 5 or 10 years ago, is really shocking. And I think the reason the general population isn't quite there is even people who work at big companies have very limited access to these tools and even more limited access to what they can do with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that someone who's sitting and all they get is like Gemini will summarize your emails for you and help you write Excel formulas might rationally turn around and say, what are these guys talking about? Like, it just made me a little easier, a little more efficient at my desk. Without seeing, what it's truly capable of building. If you supercharge it, as you talked about with your queries, by supplying it with the schema, being very laser focused and precise about the context that you provide it. Now with the skills that are available in the Anthropic ecosystem, we've moved from prompt engineering of act as a data analyst, right? And then you rely entirely on what GPT or Claude or whatever it is decides a data analyst would do. And instead, you can give it 10 pages of here is exactly what a great data analyst would do. And these are the loops that go around. This is the thinking pattern. And if you can give it very precise context and very precise instructions and gate that so that it's not wandering all over the internet, the outputs are amazing from what I've seen.
I completely agree. I think about it in terms of, I mean, this is sort of simplistic, but basically we're at a point where now, given the right objective and the right context, you can get an AI agent to do just about anything. And that context, to loop this back, is data. And if you don't have that, like if you have that readily available to a system and it's able to actually go out and find it, like gosh, you can hit enter on that request and come back 15 minutes later and it's found what it's needed. It's accurate. It's done what you asked it to do, and that's way more than summarizing an email. But again, if it's unclear, if it has to make guesses about what the data means, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest challenges of using AI to do SQL querying or analytics is if the only metadata or in your system is the name of a column and it doesn't know exactly how to interpret it, it's going to return something incorrect. So getting everything in place is super important for that leverage.
And whatever height the tsunami of AI turns out to be, whether it's 7 or 8 like we think it might be, or whether it's more conservatively 2 or 3, either way the change is coming to the way that people work, whatever size that change might be. Where do you think PE is? I mean, you've been involved in PE through a number of different technologies becoming available and sweeping through, and obviously, the Bay Area and Austin and all the other kind of tech innovation hubs are going to be first on the list, and government is going to be last on the list, right? Or somewhere near the bottom of the list. Where do you think PE sits on that scale? We talked about some headwinds of things that have traditionally worked that people are clinging to. We talked about some headwinds with operating partners not always having authority to implement change. But still, we've got revenue and opportunity very high on the agenda in the world of PE. Where do you think that it sits on the scale of technology adoption?
Well, to me, I think there's just a huge opportunity there. I think in the U.S. alone, I can't imagine how many companies there are that are medium to large size. They're doing a decent amount of revenue, but have not invested in in their technology. And you alluded to the need for PE to do more on the value creation side, or at least for that to be a key component to how they get a return on their investment. And I think now there's sort of, in my view, there's two forces that are both complementary. One, the technology, and almost like the effort you need to put in is getting, the technology is getting better. The effort you need to put in is decreasing. And more so, the need or the pressure to adopt new technologies is growing, because I think what AI is going to bring about is a world where if you're not using AI in a couple of years to its full advantage, you're going to fall behind. And I think that's going to stand out a lot more than it has with other technology, with other evolutions that we've had in the last 30 years. And so I think for PE firms that are interested in this or are looking for ways to add value, this is where I think this is the best opportunity out there.
Yeah, it's an amazing time to be doing the type of work that we do. I certainly agree with that. And on that note, Ryan, if anyone's listening and wants to find you on the world of the internet, other than typing your name into ChatGPT, what are some ways and places that people could get hold of you if they've got any questions?
So my current domain is paretoapps.co, and Ryan at paretoapps.co is the email address. I've been really busy in the last while with client work, and I need to get on setting up my website with some more case studies and things like that. But that's the best place to reach me. And also finding you by name on LinkedIn is a great place as well, as I post some ideas and content there.
Magical. Well, thanks for indulging me in a wonderful conversation about data and private equity, two circles which cross over heavily in both of our Venn diagrams. So I've had a great time having you on, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much. I've enjoyed it. I really, I've enjoyed the conversation.
Take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye, Graham.
Thanks for listening to the PE Data Guy, the place where private equity meets data. Please forward this episode to your favorite private equity friend. Thanks for listening. See you next time.